Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you're all on your 12th cup of questionable conference coffee by now, and your emails and Slacks are piling up as I speak. So thank you for taking the time to hear me out on this topic I'm really excited to share with you today. Detection is a must. Now, who am I? I already got a great intro from Tim, but been around for 20 years, started off working in the oil and gas industry in Alberta. Some people say I have a funny accent, but I have no idea what they're talking about. But after Stuxnet came out in 2010, I was really inspired by the realism of industrial cybersecurity at that point, and I kind of pivoted my career in that direction. I was able to join Shell's global cybersecurity program with some of the SANS instructors here, and worked with Accenture on some management consulting kind of opportunities, and then pivoted to San Diego Gas and Electric, where I got to get exposed to the electric sector more, generation, transmission, and seeing more of the renewable projects they were doing, some of that cutting edge stuff, before 7 years ago joining Dragos as a pen tester, and then having the opportunity to take on the role of director of detection 4 years ago. So my mission and the mission of Dragos is to really be the Gandalf of level 3.5 and below. If you're a threat, you shall not pass, or at least if you do, we want to know about it. So what inspired me to give this talk today was some voices in the industry who were kind of discounting the importance of network visibility and threat detection in ICS. And that really grinds my gears. You know, my beard isn't getting any less gray. I'm not really able to afford to lose any more hair, and therapy is expensive. So thanks for hearing me out today. This is a great way to get this off my chest. But by show of hands, how many people think I'm going to provide you a fair and balanced assessment between prevention and detection today? Oh, you guys are way too smart for that. Yeah, of course. This is going to be unapologetically biased. The name of the presentation is Detection is a Must. I work for a company that sells a threat detection product. My boss, this is kind of his baby. You know, my paycheck literally depends on people buying this product. So I got to call out that bias right out of the gate. So, but I hear people talking on LinkedIn and other social media platforms saying things like, oh, it's better to focus on the basics, working on segmentation and understanding your assets, and everything will be fine. You'll get the best ROI, trust. And threat detections, they generate too much noise and false positives and wasting already limited resources. But I can't stand by and see people discounting the importance of network threat detection and visibility these days with everything we see going on. And I really like the old adage, you cannot protect what you cannot see. And within Dragos, we respond to a lot of incidents, and quite often they really have no idea what's going on in their network. They don't know what devices they have. They've got no visibility into those ICS networks. And it's not a good look. It's not a good look when the ransomware notes pop up and all your files turn to hieroglyphics, or the government agencies are reaching out and letting you know that you've been compromised for the last year. Like, thanks guys for letting me know. Like, well, we were hoping you guys would figure it out on your own. But now, SANS, critical controls for ICS. By show of hands, how many people are sick of hearing it about this at this point in the conference? Well, too bad, because I'm going to talk about it, but not because my boss co-authored it, okay? And not because the SANS talk submission specifically called this out as something I should probably touch on, but because I really believe in it. And in my management consulting days, yeah, we struggled. Like, where do you start? Where do you even begin? You're looking at all these frameworks, and it's just a huge mess of controls. But I really believe that these 5 critical controls are a great foundation to start with. And I'm going to keep talking about them because in the Dragos year in review, year after year, we keep seeing these problems. And over 90% of the customers we work with, they've got problems with at least one of these critical controls. So until that hits 0%, I'm going to still talk about it, and I think SANS will too. So let's start at the top here, incident response. So what if I told you you can't start incident response if you don't see there's an incident, right? Detection, it triggers the IR. You're going to find detection is really spread through all of these 5 critical controls like glitter in craft supplies. It just gets everywhere. It's all over these. And not only detecting and starting that incident response, but also how do you contain that incident? How do you contain that threat if you don't see what's going in and out of that network? You need to have that visibility and that threat detection. And earlier this week, Kai was talking about in his workshop how we can start to do more of a gradual containment. Like you don't want to take the big scissors and cut that wire to your ICS network. You can just shut off DNS, or you can just shut off remote desktop. If you know that's how the threat is getting in, you don't have to take a drastic measure. You can contain that a lot easier. And you can eradicate the threat a lot faster if you understand the threat and how it's communicating. So to eradicate that threat, we've seen again, in our Dragos year in review, we've gone from weeks and weeks of recovery for a lot of these IR cases down to just 15 hours in some cases, because we could see what was happening in those networks. We were able to quickly eradicate that threat faster than we normally would be able to. Defensible architecture. I mean, I would argue you can't really do threat detection or network visibility if you don't have this in place already. You need to really separate that IT and OT traffic right out of the gate. But detection and visibility, that's what validates your segmentation. How do you know what's going in and out of your network? And like some of the earlier talks covered, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary firewall rule. You know, you're going to see those any rules all the time. That's why we've invested in products like NPView to help audit these firewall rules and get some better visibility into that part of the network. And network visibility, of course, that's the biggest cheerleader for detection right there. But you need to have that ICS context. You can't just put, you know, your grandma's IT NIDS system in your OT environment. It has to be able to understand the ICS protocols and tell that story about what's happening in your OT environment. And I'll talk more about that later. Secure remote access. How do you know this is legitimate access? How do you know that person who's logging in at 2 in the morning should really be doing that? And there's so many remote access tools you need to keep track of these days. So you really have to watch for that unauthorized access. And you can only really do that with detection and network visibility. And finally, vulnerability management. I swear, it's the hardest job in IT, and even harder in ICS. As we saw in a talk earlier today, it is a thankless job, but it's necessary. You got to do it. You got to do it. But it can be a long time between when that vulnerability is identified before you can patch it in ICS. It could be months, it could be years before you can get to that remote station, before you can get to that device and patch it. So what do? You got to watch it. You need to monitor that device to make sure it's not being exploited. So we can see how detection is the secret sauce behind the SANS 5 critical controls. That brings us to kind of an uncomfortable topic. What happens when detection fails? Now, spoiler alert, it's going to happen. It's going to fail. And it's not because it's not trying, bless its heart. Prevention is doing its best. But it's tough because the threat groups and the threats that we're facing today, they're evolving faster than Pokemon. And we really need to stay on top of that. And that's why, another thing I should shout out here, I'm using Dragos Worldview a lot in my presentations. And it's a great source of information. All of these points are right from that threat intelligence platform. So VoltSite, for example, is one of the threat groups we track. And it's been playing the long game, leveraging 0 days and attacking these firewalls and end devices to gain that initial access. And Boxsite, it's been taking advantage of that suite of Sophos firewall vulnerabilities to plant its IO control backdoor that really gives long-term persistent access into these ICS networks into these control systems on a device, on an edge device that doesn't have protection. It doesn't have any kind of malware analysis. It doesn't have virus scanners. It doesn't have EDR. So it's just persistent access for them, and held down with its Zyxel firewall, exploitations, unauthenticated command injection, and they're not even Lockbit subscribers. They're pirating the Lockbit builder to get in there. So I guess there is no honor among thieves. And Parasite with its credential stuffing, stolen VPN credentials, exploiting the edge devices and those protections that we rely upon. So the irony is a lot of these devices that we've purchased to protect our networks have become a very popular initial access point into these networks, into the networks we're trying to protect. So you could say the attackers are eating these vulnerabilities for breakfast, really. It's like the avocado toast of cybercrime, firewall exploits. Now, I got to address something here. We've got two of our wonderful platinum sponsors on this slide, and it's a little, like, it's not their fault, okay? They're doing great work, but I see Palo Alto and Fortinet in all sorts of ICS environments. It's very, very popular, and they're here. They're part of the community. They understand the ICS protocols. They're able to do things that other firewalls can't. And the reason they're getting exploited is because they're so popular. It's because they're so effective. It puts a big bullseye on their back. So kudos to them. They're doing great. They've done a great job addressing these vulnerabilities, and it happens to everybody. There's no firewall vendor that has been not affected by this. So now that I've virtually assured I'll never speak at another SANS conference again, let's talk about the bull in the ICS China shop, ransomware, and its devastating impacts. We're seeing this really take off in the last few years. They're targeting industrial networks. They're targeting especially US manufacturing because they can see the opportunity there. There's money for them to be made. These guys are professionals. You know, they're not script kiddies. You know, we talk about script kiddies like they're something you should feel sorry for. Like, oh, they're trying to just hack your environment to buy shoes for the other script kiddies who are shoeless at the script kiddie orphanage. Oh, those poor little script kiddies. Oh, no, 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 no. These guys are pros. They're professionals. They've got HR departments and PowerPoints. They probably have team building exercises. I'm sure there's ransomware groups doing trust falls as we speak right now. So they're pros. It's a massive industry. And industrial manufacturing in the US is right in the crosshairs. So we're tracking 80 unique groups who are specifically targeting in the industrial sites because they see it as a moneymaker. It's a great opportunity for them. And this whole cybercrime environment, we see it's going to be about a $10.5 trillion problem in 2025. So it's not going away. With the ransomware groups getting more aggressive and targeting our critical infrastructure to make a profit, we're also seeing dwell times shrinking. You know, dwell time, it's that cozy little time window between initial access and all your files are encrypted or exploited out on the internet, or extorted, I should say. Now, we're seeing that window shrink down from 10 days to 5 days in the last few years. We're seeing them weaponizing these exploits faster than ever. Like the recent Citrix bleed vulnerability that was weaponized within 24 hours of it coming out. So it's getting nasty out there. We're seeing these threats. They're aggressively going after industrial environments. The dwell time is shrinking. So not only do you have to have detections, but it needs to be Usain Bolt fast in those environments. You need to be able to detect these things very, very quickly so that you can stop this from occurring in your environment. Now, also, the folks with the clipboards are getting involved. The regulators are starting to pay attention. And it's not just a suggestion anymore, like eat your vegetables or don't drink 12 cups of questionable conference coffee. It's becoming a mandate. So we're seeing within NERC CIP-015, all of these external routable connections in medium and high best environments that the attackers find so charming are now, over the next several years, we'll see the requiring detection, requiring visibility inside the networks. So we need that resilience, we need that vigilance inside the networks, not just at the network edge, to protect these critical environments. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows once you get that network detection up. False positives are a very real problem, a very real challenge, and it needs to be addressed, especially when you first connect these things. When it doesn't really know about your environment, it's gonna go off a lot. So let's talk about the different types of false positives we have today. There's the actual false positive. That's kind of like, my bad, like, sorry, we didn't get that one quite right. And that happens. It happens quite often. It's hard. It's really hard to write great threat detections. It takes time, and usually the first time, just like software, the first time you put it out there, it's not going to work just right. The best threat detections are the ones that you've tuned 12 times and have really had a lot of exposure to customer environments. So it's an ongoing challenge. But there's also technical false positives, misconfigured systems. So you may have a detection that fires like your PLCs being programmed from the internet. That sounds kind of bad, but it's only because you haven't properly configured your internal and external network ranges, right? Or maybe you're using weird IP ranges in your industrial control system that look like the internet. And then we've also got true positive benign. And this is where it's an actual detection. It's legit. And we see this with Nmap quite often. You know, you kind of want to know when Nmap's scanning your industrial network. And what we find is when we talk to our customers where this is going off, there are a lot of commercial products that have Nmap built in, that they've embedded Nmap right in these multi-million-dollar network products. And it's got everything. It's got the user agents that you'd expect and Trinity ports and all that stuff. So it's common to see that. And that's a true positive, but it's benign. That's normal. That's supposed to be there. And then finally, there's also contextual false positives. And that's more like you'll see the DC sync detection. That's bad news. If it's legit, you see a DC sync detection in your Active Directory environment, that means all your passwords are getting dumped. It's not a good day, not a good time. But it's also a legitimate Windows operation. When that happens, if you're seeing a DC sync alert from an external network, it looks really bad. It looks really bad. But maybe that's just a backup. In some customer environments, we've seen that. It's just that detection fired, and it was just because it's a regular part of their process where they're synchronizing two Active Directory servers, and that's just a regular occurrence that you'll need to keep track of or allow in that environment. So this is not something you should do on your own. And I believe that just like your industrial control system, you know, the operators, they need a window into the process, right? They need to be able to see what's going on. And network defenders, we need to be able to see what's happening in the industrial networks if we're going to defend them. And you can't just plug in that Wonderware CD and run through the wizard and then your SCADA system's all set up. Like these industrial control systems, they take years to operationalize, to engineer and to build, to solve a very specific engineering problem. So the industrial network intrusion detection is no different. You know, you've got to really understand where your critical assets are, what kind of rules you're going to need to defend those critical assets, what's normal in that environment. And you're going to need to tune down some of these detections that are going to fire right out of the gate, because no two ICS systems are alike. I've seen a lot, and they're all different. There's nothing cookie cutter about them. There's nothing you can really take from one and place in another. It's even within the same organization, even within different segments of a pipeline, like there's a lot of differences. So you got to account for that. And you got to work with your vendor. You can't just expect the vendor to drop off a box and you're good to go. You know, you should be able to engage with that vendor and tune these systems and work to get it working just right, just like you would with your industrial control system with Schneider or Siemens or Ovation. Like you need to actively work with that vendor to get it to work for you. Now let's talk about some of the different types of ICS detection technologies out there. First on the list, my personal favorite, I love this. I love network intrusion detection. And again, it's not like your grandma's IT network intrusion detection system. These are OT specific. They understand the language, they understand the protocols in the OT environment. They're OT protocol aware, so they can really tell that story. They can give you that visibility you need to differentiate between normal operations and potential threats. Or sometimes if they're living off the land, what we see, the engineering workstation is used to cause the industrial control system to eat itself, right? That's what a lot of the attackers will do. Rather than creating fancy malware, they'll just get control, pull out the documents, get all those P&ID diagrams, and figure out a way of making that control system self-destruct. And they do that through the operator workstations and the engineering workstations. So you gotta keep eyes on that. You gotta understand who's logging in, when that's happening. And another thing that can help with that is SEMs. You know, within IT, these can be kind of noisy log collectors. But in OT, it's a bit different. You're looking more at things like syslog protocol. A lot of these devices in the industrial space you can enable syslog. You can turn that on and get some vital information like my power supply is about to fail on your Schweitzer relay, or you know, maybe the battery backups are going to go down, or you've seen the switch between primary and secondary. So these syslog messages in the ICS environment are really critical to keep track of. And you can keep track of them with network intrusion detection as well. You can create rules that will monitor for those, and that's one of the things we do. Or you can collect them all into a central SEM. Just having that visibility will really save you a ton of time. Having some kind of detection and visibility into that process, into the inner workings of your industrial control system, could save you weeks and weeks of incident response and recovery. And EDR, XDR. Now these endpoint device detections, usually for Windows and Linux and Mac type devices, they're very, very effective, very, very powerful. As a pen tester, when I'd come up against Falcon, I'd be like, oh, shit, like this is gonna make my life so much more difficult. But they can be problematic sometimes in industrial control systems. Some vendors may not fully approve them. So you gotta use it sparingly, like Salt Bay it kind of into your environment a little bit there. Put it on your critical systems, identify those crown jewels, like your Active Directory environment, Active Directory servers, your engineering workstations, maybe things like historians that are on the 3.5 level. So you got to kind of be careful. You don't want to put too much of that spice in your stew, or it's going to ruin the whole batch. And finally, anomaly detection. This is another way you can look for malicious behavior in your ICS networks, but you got to get that baseline right. And one thing that we've learned over the years is these industrial control systems are much more dynamic than we first thought. So you got to have that tuned just right, and keep it tuned and keep it rolling with the changes in your ICS environment, because you're going to kind of be behind the 8 ball on that one. If you're going to baseline it once and have it run for years, it's just not going to work. You got to stay on top of that and do the care and feeding required for that. Now let's talk about some real world success stories. This is story time. This is always my favorite part of a presentation. So Conficker, do you remember Conficker? 2008 called, they want their malware back. It was a very powerful worm, and it still exists. Not just 1 or 2 or 3, but multiple customers that we have Conficker in their environment today. And when I ask the OT Watch people about it, they say, well, you know, it's on this remote station. It's really hard to get to, and it's not really causing any harm. So it's kind of like their pet malware. They just kind of keep it there, and it's not really hurting anybody. So like pet malware, okay. I wouldn't recommend that approach, but you know, if it saves you some downtime, then you know, keep your pet malware. But the only way you can really do that is with visibility. If you know it's there and you know it's not causing problems, then you can keep your pet malware. Unauthorized software, this is a big problem. In OT Watch, we see this weekly, where there's stuff going on that shouldn't be going on. Like you're seeing Kali Linux pop up. You know, there's pen tests going on, Chrome remote desktop, you know, the operator going home for the long weekend, but wanted to keep track of things. So they'll turn on Chrome remote desktop or other RMM softwares, or we'll see things like BitTorrent and other fun unauthorized things. So just having that awareness to have those conversations with the people who are doing it is really important. That can really reduce that risk in those environments. And adversary detection, this is when we see some of those threat groups entering into these ICS environments. We got to be, I got to be careful what I say. With this, I can't talk too much, but we do see things like VoltSite hitting customer environments. We had a case a while ago where VoltSite had been in their environment for over a year, but we were the first to detect it because it hit something that was on the 3.5. It was bridging the ICS and IT environment. So we detected it before the IT environment detected it, and we were able to kick off the incident response and get that eradicated out of that environment. And finally, OEM vendor activities. Like a lot of these industrial control systems, they require these skids, especially in manufacturing and electric as well. You'll sign contracts with the equipment manufacturer that they need remote access. They need in there, they need to monitor and manage. It's part of their whole life cycle. It's part of their whole maintenance agreement. And if you don't, it kind of voids the warranty. So you got to give them remote access into this environment. And sometimes they do things they shouldn't. You know, they're making changes outside of change windows. I've seen them scanning from their remote access. So, you know, you got to keep an eye on them. And we've seen in the past, there's been some terrible breaches like the Televent 2012 breach where the vendor's remote access was leveraged in an attack that compromised, I think, 80% of the liquid pipelines in North America. It's a pretty significant deal. So you got to keep an eye on those vendors. You can't really trust them. And talking about segmentation, some of the best segmentation I've seen is when you put these guys in a little box. You know, if you give them just a completely segmented network, and you might just have, you know, analog in to analog out, digital in to digital out, like PLC to PLC kind of connection into those skids, so there's no possible routable connectivity into those OEM vendor skids, and it completely eliminates that issue. But at the very least, we got to keep an eye on them to make sure they're not up to no good. There's also operational value in seeing what's happening in your ICS network. Understanding when new assets are coming online is critical, as well as how they are communicating, how they're integrated with each other. I had a great story from our O2 Watch folks where this new asset appeared in their Ovation network, and one of our customers' Ovation networks, never seen it before, kind of suspicious, but then they could see as it came online, there were some program uploads and downloads, firmware uploads and downloads, and this device was being added as a new primary controller. It was authorized, it was meant to be. It looked suspicious at first, but because we could read the network like a book, we could understand the context of that new asset. It was determined to be benign. Configuration changes, as I mentioned earlier, often the engineering workstations are used as the attack platform. Once you get into that environment, once you get into that network, as a pen tester, like that's kind of game over. Once you can manipulate that control system, you can find a way to make that control system eat itself, and that's game over. So you want to understand what configuration changes are occurring. It gets a little noisy when you're tracking every upload, download, every register write, but man, that information is super valuable when you're doing incident response or when you're trying to determine the nature of the threats that you're seeing in that environment. And operator actions, determining when these RDP sessions are going into your engineering workstation, when that remote access is happening. Is it Bob, is it Mary, is it Sue, or is it someone else dialing in at 3 in the morning to do some changes to your control system? So you got to keep eyes on that. So thank you so much for coming along on this journey with me. We've laughed, we've cried, mostly about pet malware, but visibility, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways. Visibility is fundamental. You can't protect what you can't see, and effective detection requires that OT-aware technology and managing the noise. You really have to understand and be able to tell that story in ICS, as well as the detection can provide critical context that accelerates response. We can see in some cases The IR response time was down to just 15 hours instead of weeks of time. So it's a huge win. That could be millions of dollars for these environments. Anyway, my name's Austin Scott again. Thank you so much for hearing me out. I think I've used up all my time, so no questions. Haha, just kidding. If you have questions, maybe we can talk about it.
One question. Who's got it?